But then from there, I continued to study and meditate on nature, and it was in that these beautiful life cycles started to stand out to me, speak to me, and life, death, and rebirth are all a part of the natural cycle in the natural world and in our own human lives. And at the same time, I was experiencing a lot of these cycles myself in my personal life. And so it was very natural for me to work through the creature and the land to express these ideas and really bring hope in connecting the natural world to our lives. So soon after that, the raven and the carcass began to enter the picture. And not long after that, I met Jennifer. And in fact, I had heard through the grapevine that she had seen my wolves and had an attraction, a connection to them. And so we did a studio visit. I invited her out to the studio, and Brian was coming along, and I'm like, I had one carcass and like a couple of wolves at that point. I'm thinking, I'm walking them back to my studio, and I'm like, she's gonna either think I'm crazy and that I just ran over a deer and strung it up in my studio, or she'll get what I'm saying and she'll trust me and connect to it, and she did. And so I really want to thank you for trusting me with this vision with only one carcass and a few wolves, and to carry this out. And she's been incredibly encouraging and just sees it, you know, so thank you so much. So from there, I started really creating this body of work. My studio became more like an ecosystem than an art studio, and a very sacred place, an enchanting place, an escape from the craziness of the city. And so I began creating these scenes, and now there's a lot of fictional play kind of going on in here, but there's also a lot of truth that one may view when they spend time in nature in these cycles. But there's symbolism and metaphorical language throughout, and beginning with the title. So Prey, P-R-E-Y, how it's spelled in the title of the show, is representing the sacrifice made from the prey to the predator, so the natural cycle can play out. But I also wanted to associate it with prey, P-R-A-Y, and the connection to the divine that one may feel when they're in nature, something much bigger than themselves, not created by the hand of man. And so then we'll move, I'll kind of walk you through the scenes and talk about them, starting with encounter. An encounter is where the predator is stalking the prey, and the wolf has broken from this pack, and he is testing the prey. And if the prey shows any sign of weakness, then the wolf will move in for the kill. And this is a very natural cycle, and it's right here where a new life cycle may begin. Then we move to the ceremony. And notice in these titles, they're very symbolic for different times in our life that may represent life, death, and rebirth. And so we're moving on to ceremony. They represent marriage, they represent funeral. So it's kind of this intersection of gain and loss, and exaltation and mourning. And it's placed centrally, this very cyclical scene in the middle of the gallery, to really share the idea of this life cycle and the beautiful symbiotic relationships that are found in nature. So I don't know if any of you know this, but the raven and the wolf have a very symbiotic relationship. The raven, being Ariel, can see where the food is, and they lead the wolves to the carcass or to the food, and then the wolves move in for the feast, and because they have the stronger jaws, and then the ravens go in and pick up the scrapping. So one needs another to survive, and so it's this beautiful symbiosis that we may also see in our own lives, in our own relationships. So I'm always connecting that back to our own lives and let nature kind of teach you in that way. And so then we move on to reception. And reception is by virtue of sacrifice. The prey has provided for the predator in order for this cycle to continue. And so these extended, or these deer that are hung up are, you know, kind of alluding to the idea of the price of the hunt. And also by having them elevated, just the sacrifice made in order for the wolves to feast, regain strength, and carry on. So I see in nature just these beautiful cycles that bring hope to our lives through life, death, and rebirth. So I do want to talk a little bit about some symbolic numbers that are throughout the installation. We have 3 overall scenes, which is kind of associated with the divine, okay, the Trinity. And once again, spending time in a space, in a place much not controlled by the hand of man and much larger than ourselves, we can connect to the divine. And then there's the number 5. 5 wolves at the front of the area, 5 ravens, and then 5 carcasses back here. And the number 5 has some really beautiful symbolic references. 5 being the 5 senses heightened, which it's interesting because you ask someone when they feel most alive, and they typically refer to some kind of experience in nature. And I believe that's because your senses are heightened, all 5 senses. And so I really like that symbolic reference in that, and that is why we often feel most alive in nature. And then there's 5 that represents the marriage between heaven and earth. And I really use that back here in reception with these 5 lines ascending upwards, connecting the heavens to the earth. So now I do want to talk a bit about my process because I've already had a lot of questions about that. So I'm going to speak a bit about that. So it's actually kind of interesting because I always say the beginning of my process is more like a hunt. You know, my structures are primarily made of very natural materials, at least the skeletal structures. So, you know, the legs are branches, the horns are branches, and so I have to go out and find them. And so I found some pretty wild spaces in Houston, believe it or not, including my neighbor's front yard. I bring those elements back, and sometimes I go into nature with a specific line in mind for a leg or for a horn, but sometimes I allow these different elements to speak to me, and I bring them back and let them dictate the structure of my creature. So it's very fluid, it's very organic, and then I work with paper and wire and a little bit of plaster. And so I do keep it as a soft sculpture, and I do that because I still consider myself a painter, but I was a painter and still am a painter, and so when I'm sculpting, I feel as though I'm painting, and I always want to maintain that very fluid, painterly feel in my sculptural work. So that's something that I always consider while I'm working. So I think that kind of sums it up. Yeah.
Could you tell me about why words are so sparkly?
Yes, and I've done this sheen on the ravens and the carcasses more to make them glisten in this magical world of the wild. You know, it really is a magical world, and it's a world that we should all spend more time in. I think it's incredibly